Hey friends, hi everyone. It's 5:30 here in LA, 8:30 on the East Coast. Hi everybody. There are only a few more days left for Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, and so I'm going to do an interview with a friend of mine, John Marshall. He is the clinical director of oncology for Georgetown University Hospital. He's director of the Royce Center. I hope I'm saying that right. For the cure of gastrointestinal cancers at Georgetown. He's the associate director for clinical care at the Lombardi Comprehensive Cancer Center and chief of the division of hematology and oncology. He's the author of a book that I happen to blurb. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you all are here. It's called Off Our Chest. He co-authored it with his wife, Liza Marshall. And it's a deeply personal book about the toll and the reality of dealing with a cancer diagnosis. Hi, everyone. We're basically trying to find out why so many young people are being diagnosed with not only colorectal cancer, but maybe Dr. Marshall can talk to us a little bit about why we're seeing cancer under the age of 50. And I have talked to a lot of experts. Hi, Allison Ocean, another fabulous doctor from New York Hospital. And let's see, Dr. Marshall has never done an Instagram Live, you guys. So hopefully we can work this out. Let's see, I'm going to get rid of the comments only because
I hear you. Do you hear me?
Hey, Dr. Marshall. Yeah, but I'm staring at your keyboard. You
Oh,
just
then
have to
maybe
turn
what
your
I need to
camera
do is
around.
that.
There you go.
There. Now I don't see you though, but I
You
know
don't see
you.
me?
So I don't know. There's a blank up at the top, but this got to be me. It's not you. It's me.
Yes, that's what we often tell people when we're breaking up with them, Dr. Marshall. But it's great to
This is,
see you.
you and I get back together about once every, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. It was pre-pandemic the last time we
Yeah,
were together.
exactly. Great to see you. So I was just singing your praises, Dr. Marshall. He's a fantastic doctor. We've dealt with various things through the years. I've gone to Georgetown to help support the Lombardi Cancer Center. So it's great to see you again, Dr. Marshall. Also, I mentioned I blurbed your great book that you wrote with your wife, Liza Marshall, called Off Our Chests, which I
Thank
highly
you.
recommend for people who are dealing with a cancer diagnosis. But anyway, the reason
You
why I
and I
wanted
have had a lot of shared experiences, but you've beat me to being a grandparent.
thank you.
Congratulations. That is so cool. That is so
It's
cool.
very exciting. It's very exciting, but also like, wow, I'm old enough to be a grandparent. So it's a little freaky, but he's adorable and they're doing great. And I'm so proud of Ellie and Mark. I forgot how little babies were. They're so teeny weeny. Anyway, he's super cute, but that's not why we're here, even though I could talk about him all day. We're here to talk about why we're seeing this huge increase. Well, I don't know if huge is right, but a significant increase, Dr. Marshall, in people who are being diagnosed with colorectal cancer under the age of 50. I mean, I've heard everything from 10% increase from, I guess it's from 2020 to today, in terms of people under the age of 55. There's been JAMA studies, there have been British medical journals that have studied, and really they're finding early onset cancers. 29 different ones have risen 80% globally between 1990 and 2019. But I know your area of expertise is colorectal cancer. And, I know a lot of people in this field because of the work I've done. And I asked many of them, and may I call you John instead of Dr. Marshall?
Please.
Okay. I've asked many of them, John, what is going on? And I know you attended a big conference in November with some of the biggest experts in the world who are looking at this issue. So tell us what they're saying.
Yeah. We actually hosted it, which was because we hate this as you experience this on a personal level, right? And I've, over the 30 something years that I've been doing this, the dramatic change in the makeup of the patients I see day in and day out it's so upsetting, frankly, is that this morning I saw a 32-year-old with a new rectal cancer. And that's just not supposed to happen. That's not in any textbook I ever read when I was starting out. And as you say, you quote the statistics correctly. It's not just colorectal cancer. That sort of seems to be leading the front, if you will, or at least the most striking example that we're seeing all these young folks. But it is happening in other cancers. My wife, Liza, the subject of the book, she was 42 years old when she had her breast cancer. So we know there's this shift. And you're right, we are scratching our heads to try and understand every aspect of this. The first is the why it's going on. And I wish I could be smarter. We did assemble a whole bunch of very smart people who are focused on this. We're all pretty sure that it is something that we're being exposed to. We think it's some sort of environmental change. Now, when we think about the environment, we think about air and water and all of that good stuff. But what we're really focused on is our own internal environment,
Like what they call the microbiome.
Exactly. So the way I like to think of it is that, you need a rainforest, you need a coral reef, a nice mixture of bacteria and other critters living inside of us. If we still believe in evolution, don't we, in this country, Katie? I think we do.
Certainly I do.
But those of us who do believe we evolved to have this microbiome, this coral reef, this rainforest inside of us as part of our health. But you may be surprised that in medical school, still today, we spend almost like 3 hours learning about this critical part of our health. So we don't understand it, but we think that's what's happened. We've somehow changed our own internal microbiome. And just as an aside for the listeners we think it's a large part of our immune system, right? So we think it's not just cancer. We think there's going to be a lot of health lessons that we'll learn when we uncrack this nut that is young people with colon cancer.
Well, John, let me ask you about what we throw around that term microbiome all the time. Is that inside your intestines, your large and small intestines? But is it also, whenever I think about it, I think it's your stomach too. Is it not?
It's all over us, right? So sitting here looking at you is more bacterial DNA, yeah, it's a little gross, than human DNA. So mouth, esophagus, stomach. And what's sort of unsettled, I guess, is that some people think they understand it, that we can measure it, that we can change it. I always joke that the aisle at CVS thinks they know how to solve it because they're selling us all these products to change our microbiomes. But we don't really know. Another analogy, back to the rainforest, you can't just go plant a rainforest. When we cut down a forest, what do? We plant a bunch of pine trees. Well, that's not a good microbiome. It's not a good mixture of things. And so what we've got to learn is not only how we've changed it, but then how do we restore it?
So what do you think? What do you think might be responsible for changing this very important but ostensibly delicate balance? What is getting it out of whack?
Well, I'm just guessing, I have to say, but I'm not alone in the theories that we're putting forward. Is that, when you and I were kids, we went out in the backyard and we ate dirt, right, for the whole summer. That's what we did.
I didn't eat a lot of dirt, Dr. Marshall.
You should have. It's good for you. And so but we weren't as antibiotic. We weren't as hand washy. Our fruits weren't all exactly the same. To feed everybody and have every apple be red and beautiful in the store, they have to be the same. So we've cut out diversity in our food to feed the population. It's just different. It's not, we haven't mixed it up as much. And so there is some theory that it's what we're eating. There's others that it's more than that it's something else in our environment, everything from microplastics to who knows what.
Well, like forever chemicals you hear a lot about, right?
Yeah. An interesting observation just for our listeners is that, colon cancer, colon's a big organ. It's like a big question mark.
It's like 6 feet.
Yeah, but almost all of the young people colon cancers are right at the bottom part of the question mark, right? What we call the rectus sigmoid area. And that's not right. Normally you have this distribution.
Right.
through all of it, but they're all right there. And so now we're thinking about the organ as the colon as two organs, a right side and a left side, sort of like our country, a right side and a left side.
Yeah.
And they're staying apart from each other for a reason, because it's possible that the microbiomes on either side are in fact different. This is all speculation. The problem is that we have not invested in this research. And so honestly, the research that we're doing now, that we're funding now, that the Colon Cancer Alliance is funding now through the Project Cure Group, is really the initial baby steps, really scientific baby steps of just measuring the microbiome in patients who had colon cancer and those that didn't, and trying to understand what those variables are so that we can begin to at least get the patterns right.
But aren't there groups of scientists? It seems crazy to me, and maybe there are, but maybe it's not enough research dollars going into this, who are studying the environmental impact on us in terms of the incidence of cancer. For example, pesticides, as you said, sort of our food, processed foods, microplastics, all these environmental things that perhaps have changed in the last 20 years. Why aren't scientists studying that more carefully? And there must be some groups like epidemiologists or environmental blah, blah, blahs that are looking into this.
They are, of course, but it's difficult science, right? There's so many variables in a person's exposure in their life. The reporting that one does is biased by what you just remembered you did. It's really hard to track what everyone does all the time, what exposures you had during a lifetime or and the like. So, but one other observation that will be unsettling is that, the original thought, this is colon cancer specifically, that young people getting colon cancer was an unhealthy group of people, what we call unhealthy, overweight maybe, or bad
Or
diets, quote
drank too
unquote, bad diets.
much.
Yeah. But when it turns out, when you actually look at the folks that are across the exam room from me, they are young, fit, I joke, marathon running, cardboard eating patients. Right? So there's a lot of big runners, and they're very thin and they're very fit. They're very careful about what they eat. And so we're beginning even to look at the ultra marathoner, for example. This is a weird thing, but there's some evidence that on colonoscopy, their colons are up, if you will. They're all dysplastic is the word we use. The cells don't look normal. And so
Why is that?
we don't know. Again, is it the exercise and maybe the hypoxia when they're really running hard, that low oxygen to their colons? Another theory is that they eat a lot of very protein rich things while they run. We don't know. It's right. All we're doing right now is observing and tracking. Now, a really cool project that the Colorectal Cancer Alliance is doing right now is developing an app called Blue HQ. 150,000 new cases of colon cancer every year in the United States. What if we could get, I don't know, even 2/3 of them to be on this app and tell us not only about their cancer and the genes of their cancer and the treatments that they're getting, but also something about what they're eating and some other factors. And then it gives us a two-way communication, because then those people who have certain habits can get certain information about that we learn, and we can learn about them as well. So we're trying to build just the sort of thing that you're like, why aren't we doing it? Your question is spot on as usual. Why aren't we studying this in a more organized way so that we can get to the bottom of it? And my hope is that we will uncover critical things that will not only teach us about early onset cancers, but will teach us so much more about our immune systems, general health, what we should be eating, so fundamental actual health questions.
One of the other theories I've heard early on when I was posing this to like Dr. Diaz at Sloan Kettering, who did that incredible clinical trial for people with rectal cancer that
He's
had
a smart cookie. He is a smart
really
cookie, isn't he?
good results, by the way. But he told me that one theory was the over prescription of antibiotics, that somehow that is altering the microbiome in a way and kind of changing the balance of good and bad bacteria. Is that something that you've heard people talk about?
Totally makes sense. In fact, we know around like timing when people are getting bone marrow transplants or other immunologically active treatments, right, for cancers and other things, that those who have just taken antibiotics don't do as well as those who have, who haven't. And there's another observation, a little bit, bear with me, listeners. But if you take the stool or the microbiome from a patient who's responding to immune therapy, these fancy immune therapies, and give it to the patient who's not responding, some of those patients will start responding to the immune therapy.
Oh
So
yeah,
it's
that is really, are you talking about like the fecal transplant
exactly,
stuff?
exactly.
That stuff
So
is
think of it as a
crazy.
coral reef transplant. It smells better. So
Yeah.
then you transfer that over, and now this other person's immune system is now waking up to their problem. And it may be why we're seeing it in colon cancer first, is that's the place where there's the juxtaposed area. Now, there is another stream of thought that this is not sort of current exposure, but that go back a couple of generations. Yours and my mothers, when they were having us, it was more, I don't know, done where you would take estrogens and other hormone supplements. There actually is some line of thought, something I'm not really clear I understand, but some smart scientists are looking at it, that this is a wave that was a result of things that happened back in the 50s and 60s. Now,
Oh,
we don't know that, but this is another line. I don't
no,
want us to get so
no, no,
stuck
no,
in the
no. I know
microbiome.
these are all theories,
Yeah.
and I think you're being very clear about that.
Yeah. But that's
But
fascinating to me too. One more thing we can blame our parents for, but it's possible that there is something that they were exposed to, or somehow we did to people back then, that's somehow moving forward. But to me, the microbiome argument makes more sense and at least is easier to kind of dig in on.
my great, no, he's my nephew, not my great nephew. My
Mm,
nephew Ray is a gastroenterologist,
mm,
actually
mm.
in the Washington D.C. area, and he has told me stories like you told us about these very young patients, 38 years old, come in with stage 4 colon cancer. And it is absolutely heartbreaking. Well, my husband was diagnosed when he was just 41. And, you know, I'm I'm curious how you feel about the current guidelines, because I was so angry when Jay was diagnosed, because I know something like 13,000 people under the age of 50 die of colon cancer every year, or diagnosed. Which is it? Do you know? Die or
The numbers about 50,000 have metastatic disease,
no,
so
no,
it's
no.
in the
I'm talking
30s.
about under the age of
Oh,
50.
I don't know the number off the top of
Anyway,
my
I remember it was something like 13,000, and I thought, well, are those people considered just disposable? And then the American Cancer Society, and this is important for everyone listening, lowered the age for the initial screening of for colorectal cancer to age 45. It used to be that for Black patients because are at higher risk. And by the way, women are diagnosed with colorectal cancer as often as men. Some people get confused, I think, that it's an old man's disease, and we're seeing that that's certainly not true, and women are diagnosed as often as men. But my question, in a very long, drawn out, convoluted way, is 45 young enough, given the fact that we're seeing so many young people being diagnosed with this disease? What is the solution?
Again, exactly the right question, as you always do, because it's not, right? It's not. So screening tests are supposed to be inexpensive, non-invasive, and really good at solving the problem. And of course, colonoscopy is not inexpensive and is very invasive. And as you point out, even in the 45 and up group, either there's not compliance with it,
Right.
or people do have cancers in between their colonoscopies, right? So it's not perfect even then. So as you point out, we need a better screening test, and we need to know who should be screened. We're not going to be doing colonoscopies on 25-year-olds, I don't think,
Right.
at this point.
Although if
So
they have
there was a,
Lynch syndrome,
yeah,
possibly, right?
exactly, unless they have Lynch syndrome. But there was a New England Journal paper 2 weeks ago now that looked at a blood test. People have seen these, where you send blood, they look for genes from cancers in your blood, and predict whether you're going to have them and where. And this was the first colon cancer gene test, blood gene test, that was done, and it looked quite promising. And I do think in the long run, and this, which means in the next few years at the pace things are going, but that's fast, that we will have blood testing in our healthy checkups. So just like we
Right.
go and get cholesterol checks and we go and get things like that done as part of healthy checkups, that there will be some sort of blood cancer screening. And I do believe that will help and be part of this. But I really more feel that if we can figure out who and why this is happening, then we actually turn the whole screening thing upside down, because then we're not looking for early cancers. We're looking for the environment that leads to those early cancers, and we're coaching people at a preventative level than and what is healthy, quote unquote, and instead of catching things early, right? That's a
Right.
difference.
But
Yeah.
sometimes, honestly, you can, I mean, I've known case after case of people who are incredibly healthy. I mean, you talk about marathon runners, and sometimes, it's just the, genetic misfortune of having sort of that whole sequence of gene malfunctions happening and your tumor suppressor gene not working and then cancer developing despite a healthy lifestyle, despite environmental factors. So there are always cases like that too, right?
But that's yes, no question. I'm not sure we're going to get perfect on it, but I also think our concept of what is healthy. So I'm still really hopeful that bourbon is healthy. I really am. I'm banking on it, in fact. But we don't know really. We know what's healthier than we did in the year 1600. Okay, we're better there. But in terms of optimal, eating and behaviors and things, I'm sure there's more to learn. But as you say, there's also the randomness of genetics, the randomness of life, and things do happen. And that's sort of where the research is going too, because on the other side, we think that maybe all of us get cancer all the time, and our bodies can see it, sort of like the red squiggly spell checker, and
Mm-hmm.
find it. Oh, I got to go over there and fix that and fix it. And then the cancers that make it through those checks and balances are the ones that in fact get us. And so what we're trying to figure out is how do they break through? How are they breaking through the immune system, for example? That's one major line of thought. Or how do they dodge? How do they use bacteria to hide from the spell checker? This kind of thing. So
Yeah.
the science is teaching us a little bit about how cancers appear and then become a problem before the body can stop them. So yes, lots of important questions that we are working on the answers.
I was going to ask you, we got a lot of questions from our followers on social media, and one is asking if home tests really work. I've worked with Cologuard because my feeling is the best test is the one that gets done.
Yep.
And while colonoscopies may be the gold standard, home stool tests can actually sort of winnow down the people who need to get additional screening. What are your thoughts on
As
that?
with many things, we are the only country where colonoscopy is the standard, quote unquote. Everyone else does stool tests, and I think the Cologuard test is a great test. And as you say, I'd rather you do that than not do any. We were just at a church event tonight, and couple we've known forever, a little older than we are. The wife came over to me and said, he's still not had his colonoscopy ever. And I'm like, so don't tell me, go get it, or, here's my card, one of the two. But, I think this awareness, but failing to comply, the stool test solves that. At
Yeah.
least you're doing something, and it is a good test, as you point out. I would back that too.
Someone's asking if young people with Crohn's disease are at a higher risk for colon cancer.
Well, the Crohn's by itself would put you in a higher risk. And so, and they tended to be before the ones that would be the under 50 crowd, because they had had these chronic inflamed bowels for, 2, 3 decades. And so that sets up the setting for cancers to occur. So, but most of the people we're talking, so yes is the answer to the question. But most of the people we're talking about didn't have any history or known history of any sort of inflammatory bowel disease.
Are there certain cancers that run in your family? First of all, I want to emphasize to everyone listening to this, no family history is no guarantee you won't be diagnosed. I think 70%, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Marshall, 70% of colorectal cancer cases have no family history. You could be the beginning of your family history. So you shouldn't feel like, oh, I don't need to worry about it because no one in my family has it, right?
That is correct.
And then additionally, what if there are other sort of glandular cancers? For example, my late husband's mom had ovarian cancer. His grandmother had breast cancer. I remember, I think it was a doctor named Randall Burton. I could be wrong, in Salt Lake City. He had a lot of information because Mormons keep meticulous records. And there was some connection between certain kinds of cancer and increasing your risk of colorectal cancer in your family. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, there are some that run in groups. Now, you mentioned earlier Lynch syndrome. There's the breast cancer syndrome, BRCA. There are a few other syndromes that are out there that some of those families know they have it already. They've been identified. We've only been testing for these things in the last 10 to 20 years, so it's a fairly new field. But as you say, ovarian, so BRCA is breast, ovarian, pancreas is in on that. Lynch syndrome, which is the colon cancer one, has a lot of endometrial cancer associated with its stomach, but others. And there's crossover. And then there are those families where when we take the family history and we're writing down the tree, the family tree, and this person had one cancer, this had another, they don't fit our known patterns where we know the gene, we can do the test,
Right.
and you're in there. But we clearly see them run in families. And so I think there's a lot there that we don't know. You start to wonder about exposures, right? The families have certain habits
Mm-hmm.
versus there is something genetic, but there you can have a strong family history but not have a known cancer syndrome, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
And I was going to ask you, are people with BRCA getting colon cancer more, or does that have nothing to do with the increase we're seeing in under 50?
it's probably not that genetic syndrome, although you do see BRCA abnormalities in colon cancers, and you can sometimes see colon cancers in BRCA positive patients. So there is a bit of a crossover, but it's not the classic. It's not that classic BRCA pathway, but you can see them. Um, I was thinking about genetics and the young people, and I don't know how much time's left, but what I think people are not also recognizing is, it sounds backwards, but when these young people, and you experienced it yourself, your family's going, you're busy, life, and then all of a sudden out of the blue you have this terrible disease that's time consuming, life threatening, terrifying, and you're not ready for it. You're not equipped. It's at a time of life when you can't deal with it. So we're now also beginning to really study the what we call the psychosocial impact of having cancer at this age. Now, it's not fun to have cancer at 75 either, but you're in a different place at that point. And there's almost crazy, but a societal expectation. That sounds terrible, but when you're in your middle years there, it's so I mean, you should teach me more. I mean, we had our own version here at our house, but you know better than anybody just how disruptive that is. So we have to think extra for those folks, in my opinion, and take, if you know somebody out there who's going through this, make sure they know you care about them and that you're there for them, because sometimes they're not really good about asking
No,
asking
that's
for help.
true. Yes. We could do a whole separate conversation about
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
But just in closing, I want to just kind of tell everyone a couple of important things, because I think people hear young people getting diagnosed with colorectal cancer. Often in younger patients, it's more aggressive. So it's often right diagnosed at later stages. Also, they're not really thinking that this might be a possibility. And honestly, doctors aren't necessarily that um, adamant or that focused on the potential for someone having colorectal cancer. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard with people who have rectal bleeding and they say, oh, don't worry, you have hemorrhoids. And lo and behold, they actually, a few months later or later, dangerously later, they're diagnosed with colorectal cancer. So I wish you would educate internists and GPs a little bit more to look for this in young people. But in the meantime, since probably screening recommendations are not going to be lowered before 45, what would you, I mean, do you want to quickly talk about the symptoms? Because unfortunately, when you're symptomatic, it's often too late. So I guess the question is, what should people under the age of 45 be doing and thinking about and on the lookout for?
I'll just tell Tuesday, today's Thursday, right? On Tuesday, 30-year-old Arlington girl, right? Born and raised here, like you, my kids, everybody, um, had some bleeding, stool bleeding, for almost 2 years. And she saw 3 doctors, all of whom said exactly what you said. It's not, she hadn't had any kids, so she didn't have any hemorrhoids. And, so anyway, and I just was with her shaking my head. Now, fortunately, I think we've caught it still early enough for her that
I hope
I'm hoping
so.
she's going to be okay. Me too. I'm really hoping. But bleeding, change in bowel habits, are the big ones. Discomfort, change in the way your stool
Right.
looks, skinnier.
And I think sometimes people think blood in their stool means they're going to see blood in the toilet bowl. And that is obviously something you need to be aware of. But also, your stools could just be darker. And that's why they call it occult blood. It's hidden blood that is discoloring your stools. And that's something that you need to watch out and be aware of as well.
Yeah. And I guess the only good part about the young people getting these tumors over on their left side of their colon is that is the area where you do tend to get symptoms sooner. But anyway, respect the symptoms
And
is really
also,
what.
I want to mention things like fatigue, unexplained weight loss, bloating, just not feeling right.
Yeah.
And if you have those things and a doctor dismisses you, get a second opinion or definitely go to a gastroenterologist who has expertise in this part of the body because it's just really, really important. And by the way, someone said if 2 grandparents had colon cancer, when should you get your first colonoscopy? So, okay, go ahead, Dr. Marcia, you tell us.
I certainly, whenever your insurance company will let
And
you.
by
How about
the
that?
way, that's also frustrating because they charge you more if you remove a polyp because it's considered a different procedure. Can't you take care of that?
I know. Could I? Yes, I can. I'm just right down the street is the Capitol, and I'll go down there and tell them tonight. I'm sure they'll jump in on that. But yeah, that part of it is frustrating too. Is that even you almost have to have symptoms in order to have the screening test before the age of 45, unless you have a strong family history, and even then you can go in earlier. But there's also the stool test are still available, right? That's still out there. And remember, the Cologuard test is looking for genes in the stool, not just blood. So it's looking at it in a more sensitive way than the older stool tests, which were just looking for blood. So respect it. I think you and I have talked about before the sort of difference in culture of, say, the breast community, which has gotten extremely sensitive to any changes. Self-examination is part of the rule. Screening is done early as you want, honestly. And the whole society of breast physicians are way into it, right? They've engaged. And we've continued, despite all the efforts you've made, despite the efforts that others have made, we continue to battle this acceptance that this is something we can do something about and change the narrative. And we've just been way too slow
And
about it. So I appreciate your
of
attention and your ongoing
course.
efforts.
And before we go, I just want to mention that if you have a first line relative, like a father, mother, sister, brother, whatever, uncle, I believe, who has been diagnosed with colon cancer, I think the rule of thumb is you need to get screened 10 years prior to that. So my daughters will be screened when they're 31 because my husband was diagnosed at 41.
That's
And
right.
also think about genetic testing. I know that I did genetic testing, and believe it or not, I have a slightly higher risk than the average person of being diagnosed with colon cancer, if you can believe that. So genetic testing is really helpful because a lot of genes still haven't been identified, but many that have been can actually just help you determine your screening schedule and proactive things you can do to prevent the early onset or onset period of various cancers, right?
Yep. And I would say so many of the people who are listening in, my guess, are the choir. So we need the choir to go out and do some evangelizing to your friends and neighbors to spread the word.
Yeah, Dr. Marshall, John Marshall, great to see you. Thank you for doing this. I know you had a busy Friday night. You're probably, oh, it's Thursday night, a busy
Thursday.
Thursday night. I keep thinking it's Friday for some reason. Anyway, thank you again for your time. We're so grateful. For everybody watching, please talk to your doctor about getting screened for colorectal cancer. It is so preventable. Early detection saves lives. I love my followers. I want you all to be healthy and live long, productive, happy lives. So please, please, please talk to your doctors.
You are great. Thank you, Katie, very much
Okay.
for everything.
Good to see you.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.